Hello, true crimerers. So we got ourselves another compilation video. This coming week, I'm going to churn out as many of these as I possibly can because I'll be having like a new official posting schedule the week after. So I want to get all the compilations done, hopefully by the end of this coming week. This is a series that I did on TikTok called On This Day in True Crime History. Obviously, this video will not happen on the day. The video won't line up with the day and all that, of course, but so what I'll do is I will take, like for this video, this is every video I did for the month of April of On This Day in True Crime History. So there should be, I think I did 21 videos. I didn't do them every single day. So I only did it when I could find like decent enough stories to put out. So here is On This Day in True Crime History / during this month in True Crime History, the month of April. I don't like the way that sounds, but it is what it is. I can't erase what I said. So here we go. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, true crimerers. Let's do a new series called On This Day in True Crime History. It's a little bit different than my morning series of True Crime Fact of the Day. Anyway, on April 6, 1895, poet and playwright Oscar Wilde was arrested for being gay. Oscar Wilde here had a male lover, Lord Alfred Douglas, son of the Marquess of Queensberry. La-di-da. The Marquess took a criminal libel case against him, in which Oscar Wilde lost, and he would be arrested in a hotel in Knightsbridge because back then, homosexuality was against the law. He would end up spending about 2 years in prison. Wilde would die on November 30th, 1900 of meningitis. Hello, true crimerers. Let's do another On This Day in True Crime History. This is Arthur Shawcross, an American serial killer. I mean, come on. Alright, knock it off, numbskull. Today is April 7th. So, on April 7th, 1972, Arthur Shawcross would claim his first victim, 10-year-old Jack Blake. He actually took him fishing that day, but Arthur would return from the fishing trip without the boy. His body would be discovered on September 5th, 1972. Jack Blake was the first of 14 total murder victims of Arthur Shawcross. He died on November 10th, 2008, at the age of 63. And that was this day in True Crime History. Hello, true crimerers and peeper creeper behind me. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History. Today is April 8th. This was Nicholas Ingram. In 1983, he was sentenced to death for the murder of J.C. Sawyer. He also injured J.C.'s wife Mary that same evening. Nicholas Ingram here was born in Britain, but he had moved to the state of Georgia, here in the United States, at some point in the 80s. He would spend about 12 years on death row before he was finally executed. On April 8th, 1995, Nicholas Ingram was executed by electric chair. He had been pronounced dead at 9:15 p.m. that night. Well, that's it for today, so we'll see you tomorrow. Well, we won't see you tomorrow. Hello and good evening, true crimerers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History. Today is April 9th. This gloomy McGloomerpants, well, that's Emilio Estevez. No, that is Billy the Kid. He was a gunslinging teenage outlaw. On April 9th, 1881, holy shit, that was a couple of years ago, this guy was convicted of his crimes. Did you know his first run-in with the law was that he stole some cheese? Anyway, on April 9th, 1881, he was sentenced to death by hanging. But don't worry, folks, he escaped prison. And then on July 14th, 1881, he was shot dead by Sheriff Pat Garrett. Well, that was rude of him. He was just a kid. Anyway, that's it for tonight, so stay tuned for tomorrow's True Crime Fact of the Day, okay? Hello and good evening, true crimeers. It's time for today's On This Day in True Crime History. Today is April 10th. This was Ruth Ellis, meow. She was from the UK. On Easter Sunday, April 10th, 1955, Ruth, well, she wanted to seek vengeance. Well, she had been dating a man by the name of David Blakely. Turns out, he had gotten engaged to another woman. Ruth, she wasn't fond of that. At around 9:30 p.m., as he walked out of a pub with his friend, Ruth was there, with a revolver. She fired 5 of the 6 shots directly into David. The other one she shot into the pavement next to him. That ended up ricocheting and hitting a bystander. That bystander lost their thumb. Ruth calmly said, "All right, call the cops now." She was convicted of his murder. That same year she was executed by hanging. Ish. Hello and good evening, true crimeers. It's time to do another On This Day in True Crime History. And today is April 11th. This one's not so much a crime, but it is like a worst freak accident, so it applies to my page. This is Ellis Park Stadium, and it is located in Johannesburg, South Africa. On April 11th, 2001, crowds of people began to pack in. There was a football match between the Kaizer Chiefs and the Orlando Pirates. The stadium was to capacity, which was 60,000 people, but 30,000 more people were trying to get in. So it got to a point where people were literally just being shoved into things, and the press boxes had become stuffed. And as a result, 43 people had been crushed to death. And there were over 1,000 additional injuries. It turns out that there were some security guards who were accepting bribes to allow more people in. There are a lot of stories that are like this, actually, where crowds of people would stampede over each other. It's just gotta be a horrible way to go. But that is it for tonight's On This Day in True Crime History. And apologies because I have not uploaded very many videos today. I have just been extremely, sleepy tired for some reason. But don't worry, hopefully tomorrow I'll have my normal amount of content back up. Have a good night! Hello and good evening, truest of all the crimeers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History. Today is April 13th. And on April 13th, 1931, in Dusseldorf, Germany, this man, Peter Curtin, also known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, began his trial. He was a serial killer on trial for killing 9 people and attempting to kill at least 7 more. At his trial, he would be found guilty and he was sentenced to death. Now, it's believed he's responsible for a lot more murder and attempted murders, but get him where you can get him, I guess. I'm sure I'll make a longer, more detailed video on him at some point. He's on the list. On July 2nd, 1931, at the age of 48, he was beheaded. His head was then bisected and mummified. You can Google images of it because it's actually at a museum. At a Ripley's Believe It or Not museum. And that's it for tonight. Hello and good evening, true crimeers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History, and today is April 14th. This one's not so much a true crime, but it is a worst freak accidents, which does apply to my page. Pictured here behind me was the unsinkable RMS Titanic. She set sail on her maiden voyage on April 10th, 1912 from Southampton. But 4 days later, at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, 1912, the Titanic struck what is believed to be this exact iceberg. This photo was taken by another ship's captain sometime around when they were rescuing people from the water. 2 hours and 40 minutes after it hit the iceberg, the Titanic would break in half and it sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, claiming the lives of approximately 1,504 souls. And she now rests at the bottom of the ocean. And if Rose had gotten out that door, maybe Jack would still be Hello and good evening, true crimeers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History. And today is April 15th. Hey, this is Dr. John Bodkin Adams. He was a doctor from Ireland that moved to Eastbourne, which is in England. He was suspected of being a serial killer who'd killed a whole bunch of patients. This guy managed to weasel his way into the wills of 132 patients, where a lot of those patients would die under his care. Yeah. However, he would only ever be charged with one murder. And on April 15th, 1957, this happy Oompa Loompa fella, he was acquitted of that murder in a trial that people would refer to as the trial of the century. The prosecution at that point decided to just drop all of the charges against him because they felt they did not have the best case. So he was never pursued or prosecuted for any other murder. And by 1960, he was reinstated as a doctor. I guess good for you, bud. But that is it for today's On This Day in True Crime History. Stay tuned for tomorrow's new one. Yeah. Hello and good evening, True Crimers. It's time for another On This Day in True Crime History. And today is April 16th. In 1963, a Royal Mail train that was going from Glasgow to London was robbed. Now, this actually happened in the early morning hours of August 8th, 1963, led by a group of 15 men. These fellas here, yeah. Nobody was killed in the robbery. As a matter of fact, none of them even had a gun. But they managed to steal 2.6 million pounds, which in today's money would be 56 million pounds. The majority of these men would be caught by 1964, and on April 16th, 1964, 12 of these men were found guilty, and all of them combined got 307 years. Most of them spent only about a decade in prison. This is a lot of them after their release. That's it for today, folks. Hello and good evening, True Crimerers. It is time for the next On This Day in True Crime History. And today is April 17th. Pictured here is Robert F. Kennedy. On June 5th, 1968, the Democratic presidential hopeful, he was addressing a crowd at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California. Afterwards, they were brought through the hotel's kitchen, where gunfire rang out. Robert F. Kennedy had been shot, and he was assassinated. The culprit? 24-year-old Palestinian Sirhan Sirhan. He was immediately surrounded and apprehended. On April 17th, 1969, Sirhan Sirhan was convicted of his murder, and he was sentenced to death. But in 1972, California abolished the death penalty, so he was then sentenced to life with parole. Governor Newsom in 2022 denied his most recent parole attempt. Hello and good evening, True Crimerers. It is time for the next On This Day in True Crime History, and today is April 19th. Yeah, I'm pretty smoking. I know, shut up. This charming, bespectacled... Oh, got you, bud. Yeah, me too, twinsies. This fella was David Koresh. Have you heard of him before? No? Okay. Koresh was the leader, I guess you could say, of a religious group called the Branch Davidians. And he had essentially a compound at the Mount Carmel Center, and this is in Waco, Texas. The group, which was depicted by the media as a cult, well, they were suspected of having a whole bunch of illegal weapons on their property. So ATF got involved, and that is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. On February 28th, 1993, the feds tried to basically serve that search warrant. The Branch Davidians were like, nope, not gonna happen. We don't have anything like that here. And that's when the gunfire started, yeah. There was a massive firefight that broke out. Several federal agents were killed, several members of the Branch Davidians were killed, and then the infamous Waco siege began. And this was a siege that lasted 51 days. It was all over the news. It was like this cult versus the kind of inept federal agents. It was a crazy time. Well, on April 19th, 1993, it all came to an end. The feds began throwing in tear gas grenades onto the compound. This was to basically start a full-on attack. Now, shortly after they deployed the tear gas grenades, little fires broke out on the compound. And then little fires became big fires. And then the entire fucking compound was engulfed in massive, massive fires. The feds were claiming we were here to save the children, of course. Except on that April 19th, 1993, 25 children were killed in the fire. Not to mention 2 pregnant women. 76 Branch Davidians in total perished in the fire. And what of David Koresh? Well, his body was recovered. He did die, and he had a gunshot wound to the head. Now, it's unclear if it was a self-unaliving or if he was shot by gunfire from ATF. One person believes that David Koresh's right-hand man shot David in the head and then took his own life. But it's not known for sure. And that is what happened on April 19th in true crime history. Stay tuned for tomorrow's. All right. Peace. Hello and good evening, true crimerers. It is now time for the next on this day in true crime history. And today is April 20th. 23 years ago today at 11:19 a.m. in Columbine, Colorado, at Columbine High School, gunfire would ring out. It was lunchtime at the school, and 17-year-old Rachel Scott was sitting in a little grassy area eating her lunch. Her and a friend, Richard Castaldo, had heard a loud boom. Students would recall these initial booms they thought were just some sort of senior prank, when in fact they were pipe bombs being thrown towards the school's parking lot. Then the screams of "Go! Go!" and then gunfire. Rachel Scott was the first fatality in the Columbine shooting. The shooters were Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. They then began to move towards the west staircase. Students seemed to still be unsure if this was real or if these were maybe just paint guns. Unsure if this was a prank, but they quickly learned this was very much real and very much a horror story. One student named Lance Kirkland was shot in the leg and wounded, unable to move near the cafeteria. He was calling for help, and that is when Dylan Klebold, armed with a shotgun, said, "Sure, I'll help," and then fired a shot directly into Lance's face. By a miracle, Lance Kirkland would survive. For a moment, the two boys were separated, firing at different students, but then they rejoined forces. There were students who had been shot, who took their own blood and rubbed it on their face and played dead. Just minutes after the attack began, at 11:22 a.m., police were already responding to 911 calls. At 11:29 a.m., the two boys would enter the library where 51 people were inside. A student would say they heard one of the shooters say, "This is always what we wanted to do. This is awesome," as they kept shooting their fellow students. 10 people in the library would end up dead, and 12 more would end up wounded. The two shooters were then caught on CCTV in the cafeteria. The two shooters then migrated to the library again, where police had began firing inside, and they were returning fire. And then at 12:08 p.m., both shooters would put a gun to their own faces, pull the trigger, and end their own lives. 12 students and one teacher lost their lives that day. 17-year-old Rachel Scott, 15-year-old Daniel Rohrbaugh, 47-year-old William Sanders, 16-year-old Kyle Velasquez, 14-year-old Stephen Kernow, 17-year-old Cassie Bernal, 18-year-old Isaiah Scholes, 16-year-old Matthew Ketchter, 18-year-old Lauren Townsend, 16-year-old John Tomlin, 16-year-old Kelly Fleming, 15-year-old Daniel Mauser, and 17-year-old Corey DePuter. And there are far too many more just like this. Hello and good evening, true crimerers. It is time for another episode of On This Day in True Crime History. And today is April 21st. This charming fellow, his name was Graham Young, and he was from England. He was also known as the Teacup Poisoner. At the tender age of 14 on April 21st, 1962, he would claim his very first victim. You see, starting back in February of 1961, he began to administer, poison to his stepmother, Molly. His father, Fred, also became ill over that same course of time, as did his sister, Winifred. But Molly Young, whose picture I cannot find, unfortunately, after months of being sick, she finally would succumb to the poisoning that she had no clue was going on. What he was actually doing was putting lethal doses of thallium in her food. He was doing the same thing to his father and his sister. Later on in his life, when he was under investigation for other crimes, he would call the murder of Molly Young the perfect crime, because he had gotten away with it. Later down the road, after Molly's death, he would attempt to murder these two fellas, David Tilson and Jethro Batt. They would survive their poisonings. He also attempted to poison a former co-worker of his, Ronald Hewitt. Again, he failed to kill him, but he would successfully go on to poison and murder two more people, one of them being Bob Agel and the other being Fred Biggs. He was finally caught when people around his workplace were all getting sick at the same time. His co-workers grew very suspicious of him, and they reported him to authorities. He was arrested on November 20th, 1971. Under his confession, they asked him, "Why did you do all this?" He said, and I quote, "I suppose I ceased to see them as people. At least a part of me had. They were simply guinea pigs." He went on trial for two of the murders. The murder of his stepmother, well, he had just gotten away with it. He only confessed to it after the fact. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 1990 at the age of 42. So again, his first victim was on this day in true crime history, 1961. And that is it for tonight. We will be back tomorrow evening with another On This Day in True Crime History. Hello and good evening, true crimerers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History. And today is April 23rd. On April 23rd, 1998, this man here, who was 70 years old at the time, passed away while he was in prison. Who was he? What did he do? Any guesses before I tell you? Well, you're gonna just find out anyway, so whatever. That old-timer was James Earl Ray. Now do you know who it is? I sure hope so. If not, here we go. On April 4th, 1968, James Earl Ray would rent this little hotel room, and, well, he did so for a reason. He did so because of the vantage point, if you will. This was the Reverend Martin Luther King. And this was the second floor balcony of the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. Moments later, a gunshot would ring out, and Martin Luther King was shot dead. He was shot by James Earl Ray with a rifle from this hotel room. Police would find the rifle and also the binoculars nearby, and they dusted both of them for fingerprints. Those fingerprints would trace back to a convicted felon by the name, as we said earlier, James Earl Ray. He was on the run for about 2 months. He had bounced around all over the world after the assassination, but he would be captured in the UK. On March 10th, 1969, he would actually confess to killing Dr. Martin Luther King. He tried recanting his confession, but that did not work, and he would end up getting convicted of the murder. He would be sentenced to 99 years in prison. On June 10th, 1977, he escaped prison. Don't worry, he wasn't on the run long. He was caught 3 days later and put back in jail. And for good measure, they added a year to his sentence, making it an even-Steven 100 years. Which brings us back to the future, Marty! April 23rd, 1998. Yeah, he's 70 years old and he died. Kidney disease and liver failure from hepatitis C. Rest in ashes, sir. He would be cremated, and then actually he was brought to Ireland to be buried. But anyway, we'll see you tomorrow night for the next On This Day in True Crime History. Hello, true crimerers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History. And today is April 24th. This video will also double as kind of like a worst deaths imaginable. This was Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov. And his unfortunate death took place right smack dab in the middle of the Great Space Race. Komarov actually went to space in 1964, and then he would go again in 1967, and that would be the last time. On April 23rd, 1967, Vladimir Komarov would go up in the Soyuz 1, and this was going to be a test mission to see how the Soyuz 1 operated, and on board was just the one cosmonaut. Sadly, this spacecraft was doomed from the beginning. The solar panel failed, which created a power issue inside. The orientation detectors had complications. The stabilization system had died. It was a mess, so they called the mission off. So, 24 hours into the mission, they decided to bring the spacecraft home. Komarov and the Soyuz 1 would re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Then the drogue parachute was deployed, and then he tried to deploy the main parachute. But the main parachute did not open. Recognizing this, Komarov deployed the backup parachute. But then that got tangled in the drogue parachute. This all occurred at about 24,000 feet up. There was no more backup. There was no help. Komarov knew at that point he was about to die. Rumor has it that during his rapid descent towards the Earth, he was screaming and cursing at the flight staff and the engineers, just knowing there is nothing he could do. That to me has got to be just like one of the most horrifying things. To know that you are going at the top speed towards the Earth with the knowledge that you are about to die. I can't even fathom that. The Soyuz 1 would crash into the Earth at the highest possible speed, and essentially it pancaked the entire vessel. Now, I can't show you the image for obvious reasons, but you can Google this, and it's not really all that gruesome, but I do want to warn you that it is pretty disturbing. His body was decimated. It wasn't even really something you could call a body at that point. Some describe it that his body turned into molten on impact, but he was buried still with an open casket. He was awarded several medals and honors posthumously, and was considered a hero of the Soviet Union. Hello and good evening, true crimerers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History. And today is April 26th. Let's find out what happened. This lovely lady was Jill Dando. She was a journalist who worked for BBC in London, England. On the morning of April 26, 1999, Jill Dando left her boyfriend's apartment and headed back to her home. She got to her doorstep at 11:32 a.m. when, by an unknown assailant, she was shot in the head and killed. By 11:47 a.m., her body had been discovered and police were called. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The belief on what happened is this. Jill was just about to put her keys into the lock to open up her front door. But then suddenly she was grabbed from behind. The unknown shooter would then take his right arm and grab her and push her face into the ground. Then, using his left hand, he pressed the gun firmly into her left temple, pulled the trigger once, and she was dead. The belief is that the gun was pressed completely against her skin because nobody heard the gunshot, so it almost doubled like a silencer, which made police believe that this was the work of an experienced assassin. But why? They speculated maybe this was the work of a jealous ex, but they were able to rule that out. Could it be revenge on someone that Jill reported on that eventually got put away in prison for life? Police checked that too, and they couldn't find anything to substantiate that. They then wondered, well, could this be retaliation for her support and appeals for aid during the Yugoslav wars? Could it be Could it be a deranged fan, a stalker? Maybe. Okay, you need to get off the screen now, okay? Police then put all of their eggs into the basket of Barry George. It's a silly name. You see, he had a history with stalking, sexual harassment, and he was just considered an oddball. He was put under surveillance, and for whatever reason, he was arrested and charged with her murder on May 25th, 2000. And in July of 2001, he was convicted of her murder. But then it was revealed there were some not-so-nice, very shady forensic analysts involved in his case. So that evidence had to get thrown out. And in a new trial, he was acquitted. There really didn't appear to be much to say that, yeah, it was definitely him. So, police were back to square one. In 2008, police would announce that this was likely done by a professional assassin, but whoever killed her has never been caught. Hello and good evening, true crimerers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History. And this day is April 27th. And this bespectacled fella behind me is Andrew Cunanan. If you want to see the full video I made about him, go ahead and click the comment. But what did he do on April 27th? Let me tell you. April 27th, 1997 is when he would begin his murder spree. Cunanan got into an argument with his friend Jeffrey Trail, so Cunanan went and got a hammer, and in front of another one of their friends, David Madsen, he proceeded to bash in his head with the hammer. The attack was so violent he even broke his watch at 9:55 p.m., which was his time of death. Andrew Cunanan would then go on to kill 4 more people, including Gianni Versace. And that's it for tonight's On This Day in True Crime History. Hello and good evening, true crimerers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History, and today is April 28th. On April 28th, 1996, in Tasmania, Australia, the Port Arthur massacre would occur. Please click the comment to see the video made by my good Australian friend, Jared, on this case. On that day, a man by the name of Martin Bryant. He looks like Australian Stephen McDaniel. Google it. He would gun down and murder 35 people, most of that at Port Arthur. He also injured 24 more people. He would be sentenced to 35 life sentences without the possibility of parole. And that is this day in true crime history. Hello, true crimerers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History, and it is April 29th. Now, I am not going to go into great detail about this one because honestly it made me nauseous, so I'm just going to give you as much as I can. On April 29th, 2014, at Oklahoma State Penitentiary, death row inmate Clayton Lockett was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection. Now, what did he do to get there? In June of 1999, here on this property in Oklahoma, Clayton Lockett and 2 accomplices, Alfonso Veasley and Sean Mathis, kidnapped and murdered a teenage girl, 19-year-old Stephanie Neiman. Stephanie was described as a very lively, very bubbly individual. She is someone who would have gone out of her way to help a friend in need, and she liked to put on a strong face. She wasn't someone who would just back down. On June 3rd, 1999, Stephanie decided to drop a friend off at another friend's house. When they got to the friend's house, what they didn't realize was there were 3 men in there who were burglarizing it. Those 3 burglars, because they were seen, well, they kidnapped Stephanie and her friend. They bound their wrists with duct tape. According to the other 2 kidnapped victims, her 2 friends, Summer and Bobby, Stephanie put on a brave face to the assailants, and she said, "The moment you let me go, I'm going to go to police." So they shot her twice with a shotgun. They buried a shallow grave and put her inside. And by a crazy miracle, they let her 2 friends go, who then immediately went to police. Clayton Lockett, once apprehended a few days later, he just admitted to everything. He didn't hold anything back, and he seemed almost proud of it. So he was convicted of her murder and sentenced to death, which then brings us back to April 29th, 2014. That day, Clayton tried many times to end his own life by making a noose out of a bedsheet. He tried cutting his arms with a razor that he managed to get, and when they came to bring him to his execution, he refused to leave, so they had to taser him. They strapped him to the table sometime around 5:45 p.m. Between a paramedic and a doctor, they tried 9 times to find a vein. They couldn't. That is until they managed to finally find one in his groin. Little did they know, the needle was not put in correctly. He was declared unconscious at 6:33 p.m. after the first drug, which is meant to knock them out, but then 3 minutes later he is seen struggling. He said things like, "I'm not, I can't, something's wrong." He attempted to get up. He was seen struggling to breathe. He was being tortured because they did everything wrong, and they didn't have any extra drugs. So they waited until he died of a heart attack. Hello and good evening, true crimerers. It is time for another On This Day in True Crime History, and today is April 30th, end of the month. On April 30th, 1999, a nail bomb in London would explode near a bar in London's gay community. That bomb ended the lives of 3 people that night. Andrea Dykes, who was 4 months pregnant, Nick Moore, and John Light. And then 79 more people were severely injured. But this was not the beginning. This was actually the end. It began on April 17th, 1999. At a market in Brixton, which is in South London, a nail bomb would explode there. This was an area known to have a high population of black individuals. The bomb that was packed with 4-inch nails injured 48 people. Because of the community this happened in, a race war would kind of begin. There were racist groups that tried to take credit for it. The following week, April 24th, 1999, another nail bomb would explode. This time in the Brick Lane community of London, which has a high population of Bangladeshi. 13 people were severely injured. One of the injured in these attacks was a toddler. This is an x-ray of that toddler's head. Now, they survived, but you can see the damage that was done. That nail was fully embedded in their skull. On May 1st, 1999, because police had used camera footage to see who might have left the packages, police would enter the home of 22-year-old David Copeland, and he lived in Cove in Hampshire. They found all the materials that were used to make the bombs, including several packages of nails of various sizes. They also found paraphernalia of the 1930s and 40s German persuasion, if you know what I mean. He also had newspaper clippings about the attacks pinned to his wall. What was his goal? He wanted to incite a race war and culture war. He was a far-right extremist who was hell-bent on causing chaos. Copeland was schizophrenic, and as he grew up, he had these suspicions of his own sexuality being something that was wrong, meaning possibly being gay. This would turn him into a severe homophobe, which is actually kind of common with men who are gay who are trying to suppress it. He was also heavily into drugs and alcohol as a teenager. He was a very shy, introverted kid. He was never sociable. And ultimately, he was persuaded by extremist political groups. But his actions were actually his and his alone. There was no proof that he did so at the behest of any group. He tried to claim he was crazy, but it didn't work. He was sentenced to 6 life sentences. Womp womp.